a tremendous effort, and even this over the last year and continuing. We're really in one of the most stressful times in history in healthcare in the last 100 years, in that we've been dealing with the COVID-19 outbreak, and our health system is still dealing with that. We're happy that it has lessened significantly. We do have a very courageous team, but they're probably just a little bit tired and maybe even a little bit stressed with all of that. But our team has really been committed to what I view as one of the greatest public health efforts for health in the last 100 years. And this really involves the treatment, the testing, and also the vaccinations for our community as well. And we will stay in that game until there's no more need for that. We've shared within the executive summary, just a few anecdotes of change. And, one of those is that our provider office visits, and I would really call this the most important cardinal statistic as to direction of any health system, where provider office visits have grown from about 47,000 to 110,000. And this is from fiscal year 15 to fiscal year 21. The percentages of our revenues that have represent outpatient have grown from about 66% to now over 80% of our revenues are outpatient. And this is really a prototype of envy for many large healthcare systems in America today. And we truly work really hard to keep patients out of expensive entry points in a health system, which would be our emergency department and our inpatient units. And if anybody studies our statistics closely, our ER visits and our inpatient average daily census have not changed that much over the last 5 years. And that's not by accident, that's by intent, as we're working very proactively to help the health status of our patients. We have implemented many strategies from our focused strategic plan, and probably related to the physician makeover and improvements. One of the most important strategies within our strategic plan was the establishment of rural health clinics. We have 3 up and running and a 4th site that's underway. And this is vitally important for the fastest growing component of our health system to really make physician services more financially sustainable in a very tough external environment there. We have a long list of future innovations for our health system that we're still working on. And one that's going to be relatively near term is to achieve level 3 trauma later this calendar year in the fall. And so we just really invite you to enjoy the hard work that our various departments have done and Crystal and her team have done. And I think she'll also be sharing how we are outperforming our previous 10-year forecasts, and our commitment is to ever improve in quality, to ever improve in our patient satisfaction, and also have a much stronger balance sheet as the years go by than we had when this all started. And hopefully we've really made a difference in lowering that vast amount of unmet healthcare needs within our region, though that journey is never over. So I'll turn it over to Crystal.
Thanks, Harry. I think where I want to start first and foremost is to say thank you to Jay and our management team. And I think Jay would agree with me on this. This was probably one of the smoothest budget years we've had. Our directors and managers were very timely with getting their information pulled together. Jay did a lot of additional training sessions and one-on-ones, and it just went incredibly smooth, which it always brings me a good relief, because I don't like scrambling or having to tell you we're going to be a little late or anything along those lines. So this year kudos to the team. They all did an awesome job. It made the tail end of pulling everything together quite smooth, and we were able to get you the materials pretty ahead of time. So I was pretty pleased with that. So thank you to everyone for that. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen and just hit on kind of some high-level highlights of the budget here. Let me make sure I'm selecting the right file. So you should be seeing the fiscal year 22 operating budget summary. Could somebody give me kind of a thumbs up if that's indeed the case? Great, wonderful. So just to hit the highlights, our gross patient revenue is coming in just over $471 million. As you all know, in healthcare, what we bill is never really what we ever collect. It is reduced by contractual allowances, bad debt, and financial assistance or charity care. And so we're projecting that that gross number comes down to a net of just over $235 million for the district. On top of that, we anticipate additional operating revenues of about $13.8 million. We do support our wellness neighborhood programming with property tax revenues, so about $1.3 million of that to support that. And we'll have just over $228 million in operating expenses. That gives us an EBITDA line. There's no T in there because the district does not pay taxes. So for those of you that are in the accounting world looking for that T, it won't be there. But our EBITDA line is just over $22 million. We're expecting a total of about $14.3 million in property tax revenues between what we use to support our wellness neighborhood, our general obligation bonds, as well as our normal property tax revenues. Almost $14 million in depreciation. Interest income is climbing a little, but interest rates have not been great. But hopefully with our new investment management firm we'll be working with, we can make some improvement there. But it's still a little low at about $571,000. We have interest expense of about $4.5 million, and a little additional other non-operating revenue tends to be more along the lines of donations on this line, which brings us to our net income of just over $18 million. So that is the high-level view of what our fiscal year 22 budget will look like. Our EBITDA percentage is 4.7%. Our return on equity is 8.5%. And using our days cash on hand calculation, we're at 197 days. I've also included the Standard & Poor's calculations for the 22 budget. We use this for comparison for bond rating purposes. They have a slight difference in how they calculate our ratios. They include some other small things that we do not, but the percentages overall are pretty close. So the EBITDA margin and operating EBITDA margin are 13.9 and 13.3 respectively. Our operating margin is 6.3, excess margin 6.8, and the days cash on hand with S&P is 196 days. The main difference here is the inclusion of interest expense. So those are the highlights of the fiscal year 22 budget. I'm going to go ahead and jump to Incline Village. As you all are aware, we have our facility over in Incline, and we do show a separate statement of revenue and expense for that. It's going to be on page 12 of the packet. And I have it on the screen for you here. So you're currently looking at the last 5 years of audited financial statements, what we budgeted for 21 and what we're budgeting for 22, and also how we think 21 is going to end. So looking at the budgeted 22 column, we are budgeting net income of just over $2.1 million for Incline Village. We're projecting they're going to end 21 at about 2.8 million, and their budget for 21 was 1.8. So they are on target to exceed their 21 budget, And we did increase the 22 budget from the 21, but did not go as aggressive as what they're projecting. We do anticipate some increases on our expenses, primarily here in salaries and wages and benefits, which we will discuss in a little while. And the rest of this section, if you have your binder, are the breakdowns of what we call our separate business units. I'm not going to go over those in detail, they're for your information, but you are able to see home health, hospice, our children's center, therapy services, what our multi-specialty clinics are projecting to look like, our oncology program, and the wellness neighborhood is also in that section. What I'd like to jump to now is a little bit of a conversation about how we calculate our gross revenue. And as I go back up to our overall summary here, as I said, our gross revenue is projected to be just over $471 million. There is a section in the budget binder for volumes. What we do to project our revenues, we look at our historic volumes. We look at what we anticipate the future to bring, new services we're intending to bring on, growth within our clinics, growth within our ancillary services, and we come up with a revenue per unit that we utilize to project out our overall gross revenue. In addition, we have to look at our payer mix because each of our payers pays us a little differently. And this year in our budget, on page 40 of the budget binder, there is a section called gross revenue payer mix. And as of our projection, when we pulled our binder together, our projected fiscal year 21 percentages is that we expected our current revenues, we're seeing about 36% come from Medicare, a little over 16% from Medi-Cal, a little over 45% from commercial insurance, and then just a little bit in this other category, which could be self-pay, maybe a little workers' comp. Budget for fiscal year 2022, you can see we increased the percentage from Medicare to 37.2%. We did increase our Medi-Cal to 16.6%, and we did decrease our commercial to 43.6%. So we were anticipating continuing to see a shift in those two patient populations and how that impacts our overall gross revenue. There's some graphs in here that kind of puts our historical view into perspective for you. This is our overall gross revenue. This is our commercial insurance going back to 2011. We were almost at 50% at that time. And then over the years, you can see at 2021, we're right here at about that 45%, and we're projecting to drop a little bit lower than that. Our Medicare has climbed over the years. And we are projecting an increase as well from 2021. And our Medi-Cal has kind of done this nice little wave here. Here's some of the expansion of the Medi-Cal population with the state of California. And then we saw a trail off here as more people sought commercial insurance on the exchange or had the ability, or employers were providing. And now we're seeing a slight creep up again in our Medi-Cal population. So this graphically just shows you the trends of what we've seen over the years. As I stated, our gross revenue is never what we get paid, so we have to reduce that by contractual allowances, as well as bad debt and financial assistance. We are projecting, I'm going to pop to that page here real quick. This is page 45 of your binder. So we are projecting about 3.6% of our gross revenue will be written off as part of our financial assistance program, and about 1.9% of our gross revenues will be considered bad debt. Bad debt is generally someone who is not willing to go through the process of financial assistance, or may not qualify for financial assistance, but still does not make arrangements to satisfy their financial obligation to the facility. So between the two, we're looking at about $25 million between the two areas that we don't expect to receive any reimbursement whatsoever. We've also included in our budget additional funding that reduces our contractual allowances from the state Medi-Cal programs. So we participate in what's called the AB 113 non-designated public hospital IGT funds, rate range IGD funds, as well as the AB 915 Medi-Cal outpatient supplemental fund. These are pools of money that are available to hospitals and district hospitals to help make up the difference between the poor reimbursement we get from the state from Medi-Cal patients, and tries to help make up a little bit of the gap between what we get paid and what our cost actually is to serve those patients. So between those three programs, we're looking at about 6.1, almost $6.2 million of additional funding to help bridge that gap between what we get paid and what our actual costs are to serve that patient population. So once we have gone through our gross revenue to our net revenue, the next section we really concentrate on is our expenses. And I'm going to jump back up to page, I think it was 5, if I can get, come on. So our operating expenses are $228.6 million. And I'm going to go down to the actual summary. This is page 7 of your binder. So our operating expenses are made up of a variety of categories: salary, wages, and benefits. We did include a 3% increase to our wages. This is based upon the contracts we have with our union employee associations. So we have included that in our budget. We also have included what equates to increases in our FTE counts. And that's a full-time equivalent, or the number of employees that we employ. And if you were to go to page 46 of your binder, so in the summary, we did compare our FTEs we operate with today to the FTEs that we are budgeting for fiscal year 22. And what I would say is these look like increases that we're making on what we're operating today. But in some cases, if we were to look at page 49, in some areas, these increases really aren't increases. We're bringing departments back to core staffing levels. And I think the board has heard me several times over the last several months that it's been rather difficult hiring currently right now for Tahoe Forest. We have a lot of open positions. I know personally in our Access Center, we are down several positions. It's been very difficult to recruit folks to come work in our Access Center. And it has caused some of our wait times to answer the phone and to get people scheduled. It takes more time than we would like it to, but we're doing the best we can until we can get our staffing levels back up. So it's really important to really look at our fiscal year 21 budget versus our 22 budget. And you'll see that where it looks like we've had a decrease or an increase in staff, we really may not have. We may just be bringing them back to core level staffing that they should have if we were able to fill the available slots in each of these departments. So I did want to point that out, that there were just some areas that aren't new positions. We're just trying to get to core staffing. However, there are a few departments where we did add positions. For example, in our engineering department, we have quite a few projects going on. We have a very large master plan, and the amount of requirement put on our engineers for our facilities has been fairly significant. So we have added 3.7 FTEs as compared to the 21 budget, but it's really at the level that they're operating at today that was approved by Harry during our fiscal year 21. So I just thought it was important to point this out. Same with areas like our accounting department. It shows that we're increasing it by 1 point, almost 3 FTEs, but we're really not adding any FTEs as compared to the 21 budget. We just have not been able to find someone to fill our senior financial accountant position. There are areas like the Access Center where it looks like we're adding 13 FTEs, but really we're adding 3.8, and that's for the additional providers that we're anticipating coming on in fiscal year 22. One of the biggest areas that you'll see the increase is not really under Tahoe Forest as a hospital. That's 12 FTEs. But where our biggest area of growth, which you would have seen in our volumes, is really in our clinic setting, where we continue to add providers, where we continue to try to expand access to care, and that requires infrastructure in order to be able to manage all those clinic visits and those providers that are seeing our local patients. So the multi-specialty clinics, this is where you're going to see the most growth. And the red zone are additional FTEs to help support either new providers, expanded hours, new locations with more exam rooms. So that is almost a 38 FTE increase in staff to help support our providers, which we are showing that we're going to have a new provider for ophthalmology. We have our respiratory illness clinic that we're still going to somewhat maintain. We've got new orthopedic provider coming on board. So as we expand these physicians in the clinic setting and the clinic visits, we have the additional FTEs that need to support that. So that's what's making up the increase in our salaries and wages. And of course, as salaries and wages go up, so do our benefit costs. So the amount that the district supports from a retirement plan perspective, from a workers' comp perspective, sick leave, paid leave, all those come into play in the calculation as we have additional FTEs join the organization. That is probably the largest increase that you're going to see on page 10 of your packet. This is where you see salaries and wages and benefits going from a projected 21 of just over 108 million to now about 124 million, or almost a $16 million increase. So that is the biggest increase we're seeing in our operating expenses. We have very little movement in workers' comp. We are what I'd call partially self-insured for workers' comp. We're able to manage that program very well. And so we have just a minimal increase in our workers' comp benefit. Medical insurance, as we add additional folks in a full-time or part-time capacity to the district, the medical insurance coverage that goes with that, and we again are self-insured, so we do expect to see an increase in our health insurance costs just from the additional FTEs that we're adding. Our professional fees, we actually are not expecting to see much of an increase. We are anticipating some of our medical staff providers to go from a professional fee contract to an employment contract. And, but on top of that, we do have a few areas that we think will have some additional costs some in the area of legal and professional fees, as well as therapy services. Our therapy, physical therapy, speech, occupational therapies are a contracted service, and they're also within this category. We do expect to see higher volumes for them, which will also be a higher contract cost. So what looks like a neutral position is moving physicians to employment, but having additional costs for therapy services and legal fees. So the two kind of neutralize themselves. Supply costs, we do expect to see an increase, about $2.8 million. That is predicated on inflation and just a flat out increase in the volumes we were projecting. So there's nothing fancy in the supplies. We do a calculation based upon volume for each department and add inflation, and that's what we continue to carry. In the area of purchase services, we're looking at a $975,000 increase. This area has to do with our maintenance agreements. So on our diagnostic imaging equipment, on our copiers, on our software programs. This is also where we house our fees primarily for our network infrastructure, for Epic, our EMR. So as we continue to either, if we've added new equipment and the 1-year warranty is up, we now have a new service agreement for that piece of equipment, or any additional increases that vendors may be adding to our agreements, just like we see inflation on our maintenance agreements too. So that's primarily what's happening with purchase services. In the area of other, this houses categories such as dues and subscriptions, training, education, building rent, equipment rent, utility costs, insurance costs. We do expect to see some increases in our utilities. We do expect to see increases in some of our rents. We also know that as the district moves forward on aspects of their master plan, we are going to have to secure alternative locations that may cause rent so we can move bodies out of certain spaces to do what we need to do in that space, and then be able to hopefully move them back in if that is the plan. We also have marketing in here, and it's been on the radar for a while with the senior leadership team, our departments, our physicians, as well as the board, to make sure we're reaching our community and making them aware of the services that we provide. So there has been additional increases in the area of marketing to continue to work to make sure our community knows that we're here and the services we have to offer. So all of that adds up to a little over $228 million of operating expenses, which brought us to that EBITDA line. And then we have a little bit of that non-operating revenue, which I think is pretty self-explanatory based upon the categories, to get us to that $18 million. So at this point, the one thing I want to note is one subject on gross revenue, which is a rate increase. And typically every year within our commercial insurance agreement, we are allowed to increase our charges by a certain percentage. And we have never exceeded a 5% increase in any year. This year we are requesting a 5% increase, and I'm going to go to that section. Sorry if I'm making you sick as I'm scrolling through this really fast. In the back of your binder, this is page 80, we have some information available for you to let you know where Tahoe Forest sits in basically the charge structure within the state of California. So we pull this together every year as the website, which is the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development. This is from 2019, which is the latest information they had available for me to pull data. And we look at what the gross inpatient revenue is per discharge. We look at all California hospitals, all California district hospitals, since we are a district, we use that for a comparison, and all California rural hospitals, because technically we're considered a rural hospital as well. So our gross inpatient revenue per discharge is just over $50,000. For all rural hospitals, which there's 57 in this category, it's $57,537. For California district hospitals, which there's 34 of those in this category, it's just over $68,000. And for all California hospitals, which there's just over 300, it's $98,872. So Tahoe Forest is actually 48% lower than this all California hospital category. So our charge per discharge is much lower than several of these categories, and which is a great, it's not great, Harry will tell me it's not great, we should be comparable, but we are very conscientious of our pricing, and we're trying to do what we can to make sure that our prices are reasonable, comparable, and that we aren't off the chart when it comes to the rest of the state of California. And I think it's important to note that it really is the state of California we compare to, because those are the rules and regulations that we must abide by for our building codes, labor codes. We all fall into that category, so this is the right comparison. In here, we also decided to select out those hospitals that we tend to compare ourselves to give you a feel, once again, of where does Tahoe Forest sit in gross inpatient revenue per discharge. This is us over here in this brown color, and then you can see this is Sutter Auburn, this is Mammoth, this is Marshall Medical in Placerville. We have Sutter Roseville, we have Sierra Nevada, we have Barton, and then this is just the California statewide average. And really, Mammoth and us are the closest comparison where we're still lower than all these other facilities. So once again, our gross inpatient revenue per discharge is lower. We also look at ourselves on an outpatient basis per visit, and it's the same classification, all California, California District, California Rural, and Tahoe Forest. We're 36% lower than all California, but in this circumstance, we are higher than rural, and we are higher than the district hospitals. A lot of district hospitals are also rural hospitals. And as we continue to grow in our outpatient setting and provide more specialty services and expand our cancer program, I would expect that this outpatient revenue per visit to be higher than just a rural hospital, because we do provide additional specialty services that they may not. So there is a rationale why we wouldn't be quite as equivalent to these other facilities. And then we also did the same thing with the comparisons to these other hospitals. Here we are. This is Marshall. This is Mammoth. This is Barton. We're pretty on par with Barton. And then here's some of the larger facilities, Sutter, Auburn Faith, Sierra Nevada. Here's the California statewide average. So again, we're not wacky, I guess I would say, when it comes to this comparison. So when we looked at our rates, I do pull the top 25 just so you can have a comparison to see what we're proposing. And really, we're proposing a 5% increase on everything but our room and board charges. So the room charge to be in an ICU bed or the room charge to be in a medical surgical bed is not changing. But there is a 5% increase on all the other charges within the health system. And even with that 5% rate increase, as we compare ourselves to Barton, Southern, Marshall Medical, and Dignity at Sierra Nevada, anything that is yellow in this area means they are lower than us. Anything that is blue means they are higher than us. So this is all green, which means that if we average these 4 hospitals, we are still significantly below, on average, what these 4 hospitals charge. So even with the rate increase, we are still quite comparable to California facilities. Now, Reno is a different market, and Reno does not have to play by California rules. So when we compare ourselves to Renown and St. Mary's, we are definitely have areas where we are higher and we are lower. If we look at our emergency room charges, we are actually lower than Renown, but higher than St. Mary's. When we look at some of our labs, we're higher than Renown, but lower than St. Mary's. And then we kind of have this mixed bag down here in imaging. Please keep in mind, this is not freestanding imaging centers. This is not freestanding lab services. Although we are comparing to their outpatient services department, which you can price differently than if it was part of the main hospital. So we are still comparing hospital service prices to outpatient prices of these other facilities, if that makes sense. So I want to pause there because I want you to understand that and see if there's any questions regarding that concept.
No.
Okay, all right. So we also take all 6 of our comparisons and average them together here. And really there's only one area where Tahoe Forest is in the upper range of pricing, and that's for the TSH lab test, the thyroid stimulating hormone. Other than that, with these 6 combined, we're still quite competitive. So this 5% rate increase has been built into this budget, and I will be seeking your approval of that 5%. That would be effective on August 1st of this year. So that covers our fiscal year 22 budget. And I want to stop there to see if there's any questions before I dive into our 10-year forecast. You know, I should probably hit real quick on, unless you don't believe I need to. Obviously, we did our statement of cash flows as well. And that statement of cash flows is on page 57 of your binder.
Crystal, I did have a question for you.
Sure.
Want to entertain it?
Yes, please ask.
I was a little surprised at the payer mix going up in Medicare and down in commercial. I read recently that the city of Truckee, and I presume also it's true of North Shore of Tahoe, has grown in population over this last year. And there's some speculation that one of the reasons for that growth is individuals who were second homeowners up here who have now become permanent residents because they found they could work remotely, and probably after COVID will continue to work remotely. And I think of those people primarily as commercial payers and not others. And so I was surprised that, was that taken into account when you established this reduction in the commercial?
Well, I'm going to use your words, Dale, that is speculation.
Yes.
We have not seen confirmation. And so we also have to keep in mind the Bay Area is a high utilizer of Kaiser as well. And Kaiser likes you to stay in Kaiser. So we may or may not see a chunk of that patient population. So in this case, we're playing the let's wait and see what happens, not speculating on a switch in our payer mix that would make a significant difference in that net revenue number. And then to have it not materialize would not be a good thing.
Okay. Question 2, I noticed that you think that interest income is declining, but the budget, of course, was done before we got that money manager. And it's a small item. I mean, the difference is not significant, but I'm sure you're now hopeful that perhaps interest income will be increasing rather than declining.
Well, that's the plan.
Yeah.
So it also depends on how quickly we spend our cash reserves on some of our master plan projects, as well as we continue to see some of these funds be repaid to the Medicare program for our Medicare accelerated payments. So those are the two things we have to keep in mind as well.
Right. And then just one third question, if I could. I recall years ago when we were comparing ourselves with other California rural hospitals, and overall placed us somewhere in the 34th percentile. But when we added in the Reno hospitals, you remember we got that consultant who was helping us with our CPSI installation. She was able to get that data since it's not available, obviously, from Cal OSHPD. But when we added in the Reno hospitals, we dropped to the 27th percentile. It seems like in many cases, our prices have increased more, and we are above, in some cases, Renown, and in some cases, St. Mary's. I noticed Sparks is not in there. But I look at those individuals who argue, you know, our real competition is not other California rural hospitals, it's Reno. And I just wonder, is that a concern?
So keep in mind, Reno has a couple of legs up on us. One, they're in the state of Nevada. So they have definitely different rules, different regulations, different building requirements, different licensing requirements than what we have to operate here. California is definitely more costly, period, no doubt. The other thing that we have seen with the Reno hospitals is they have been slowly reducing their charges, not increasing their charges. And they have been pushing more, I'm going to call them a freestanding. They're doing more competing with freestanding imaging and freestanding lab services to compete against the Reno Diagnostics and the Quest or LabCorps by establishing their own, separate from the hospital facilities. We don't have that either. And so the pricing you're seeing is that pricing compared to what our pricing is to service those patients in a OSHPD inpatient certified hospital. So there is some differences, and we don't have the funds to have 3 CTs in Truckee to go buy a third CT scanner and set it up to do this. So what we have to do is strike a balance between the volume we see, the cost it takes for us to do it, and the pricing we can offer to our patients. And we will never, ever, ever be able to compete with a facility that has high volume, because we don't. And the more volume you see, obviously, the cheaper you can price things. It's just like with any commodity. So as we continue to grow and see increases in our patient population and start being able to shift some of our outpatient services to our outlying buildings, we then can definitely start pricing things differently and be more within line of what maybe that Reno market might be. But the whole state of California is struggling with this, especially as we continue to have more and more imposed on hospitals with no funding sources to do it with. So we definitely have challenges being a California facility. Harry, I don't know if you'd like to add anything to that.
No, I think it is, those are important differences. You know, they have a cost of living index that's, I think, somewhere around 1.1 or 1.15, and it's, I think, around 1.4 plus here. Their labor index is different, but it is clear they have established many satellite entities, as she indicated, and they probably have a greater difference than between their inpatient hospital pricing list and their outpatient pricing list. We presently have one list, and what we're showing, I think, is our current prices. And I'm thinking this may not be these other entities' current prices, but it's the latest information that we have. So there might be a little bit of a bias there that we're comparing our future prices maybe to numbers that could be a year or two old for them as well. And I may be wrong on that, but Crystal, you could correct me if I'm on that.
Well, there are certainly some hospitals that I did find were adhering to the new pricing transparency rules and regulations and had their current information available. Some still had charge masters that were a year old. I can't remember specifically what the Reno ones were, but there was definitely a variety. And so I really don't go to OSHPD anymore to pull this data. I go to the hospital website.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Crystal, can I just make a comment or two? Number one, thank you so much about your explanation for the FTEs, because a couple of those numbers really sent up flags for me to say, what, why? Also, in the FTEs, we have scheduling and then we have access/scheduling. Are they really one department doing two functions or two?
Yes. So our access center, centralized scheduling, yes, they help patients get scheduled for their clinic visits or whatever it might be. But there also are financial customer service representatives. There also are authorizations team. They also do some eligibility. So they do quite a bit of what we try to do the upfront work with to try to get our patients in the door to be seen. So they definitely do more than just schedule.
Okay. So that's different than what registration does.
Yeah, registration is when you're ready to come actually in for your visit. They're the ones that do the rest of your registration, get a copy of your insurance card, maybe your driver's license. That's the registration team.
Okay.
But
thank you again for that, because it was really helpful to lower my anxiety about FTEs. Then my other question has to do with volumes, and it's pretty self-explanatory as you've outlined it. But when we get to page 23, we talk about the TCFH. It sounds like, is it a freestanding physical therapy building that we have, or office or clinic?
On page 23. Okay, where on 23? I'm sorry, Alice.
It's in your grafting, it's right there. TCFH.
Oh, that's the Center for Health, where our primary physical therapy services are provided. So that's where our primary location for outpatient physical therapy, aquatic therapy, speech, and occupational. But we also provide therapy services in the hospital, so you'll see it there. We also have therapy service over at Incline, so you'll see it there. It just depends on where that particular service is located and the volumes associated with it.
Okay, that explains that. So thank you again.
Sure.
Well, one last question about our payer mix. I think in all the budgets I've been so fortunate to look at, we never have anything from the county in our payer mix. Is that something that can be eliminated, or are there counties that actually pay for healthcare? Because I thought ever since the Affordable Care Act and Cover California that we have had no counties really doing it.
Really, for us, there is no county. I can't speak for all counties if they have any kind of additional programming where they might provide it. But it's a standard classification that we utilize. So it just happens to be 0 for us. It's a pretty consistent term used across healthcare. So,
Alice, every county has Section 17,000 obligations for healthcare, and I used to run one at my previous county system. But most counties that don't actually have their own county hospital, which would be true for Placer and Nevada County, they spend it somewhere else. But So that's one reason why it's zero. It shouldn't be zero, but it is here.
I know once upon a time, Placer County had some kind of health care for indigent adults, and we used to have to call for authorization for them. But I've not seen that since Cover California started. Okay.
It's
I
been
wanted to
years.
make just a couple of additional comments on some of Dale's questions or comments earlier, and that is that with, you saw that on the inpatient revenue per discharge, we're about 48% below the statewide average. That really is the bogey that health systems all across California look at in majority. And this is the lowest I've ever seen of any hospital I've ever worked at in California since 1980. So it's really unusual to see us be 48% below the statewide average with our acuity and variety. The other thing that's so important too that we've been sharing year over year, we're more regulated than any other kind of business, whether it's a public utility or other things, in that if we were to choose to forego an increase or even to, I would say, be unwise to consider any decrease, we can never make that ground back. That's a permanent loss because the way our payer contracts work, we have a ceiling there per year that they will allow. And so that's kind of forever lost revenues that no other business out there that I know of experiences that kind of forever loss as well. So we have to kind of be thoughtful, do small steps every year. And we also, when we put in an increase, as was shared in the narrative, if it is 5, for example, we're lucky if we can get 2.5 out of it, which is tough as well. So those are just important considerations in the Reno market too. And for example, one of the things that allows them to move away from just a focus on retail pricing, all the major Reno providers are participating in homegrown health plans. And so, for example, if in many other facilities I've been in where you have a larger and larger percentage of your business is capitated revenues, that really takes the focus away from charge, and you're looking at your capitated revenue stream, and then where is the lowest cost setting to provide that service in a capitated setting. So the whole focus on charges, should capitation come into play and become a large percentage of activity, it does create a different focus away from charges as well.
Well, does anybody else have questions for Crystal? Otherwise, she can continue.
No, I just thought this was a wonderful presentation. I thought the binder was so complete, and again, the narratives are just wonderful and really help to guide us through.
So I do want to hit on the capital budget real quick because you will be requested to make a motion to accept our 3-year capital plan as well as the existing budget. So our fiscal year 2022 capital budget totals about $37.5 million. Almost 29.5 of that really is the building projects that we have going on. We have 1.3 million related to IT and about 6.6 million in equipment. This has all been included in our statement of cash flow, which is right here. So here's those numbers you were just looking at, anticipating the outflow of cash. And we still anticipate to end with about $123.9 million, and that represents 197 days. We are not anticipating any new debt within fiscal year 22. We will do this with our cash reserves, and we do anticipate having our Medicare accelerated payments fully repaid by the end of the fiscal year. So you can see that declining over the first 3 quarters, with it finally being repaid by the time we hit the 4th quarter. So just wanted to review that with you very quickly. Yes, Dale?
Crystal, at one point you said that you were going to entertain additional debt to cover particularly some of the building projects. What went into your decision-making to rely on reserves?
We'll hit that when I go to the 10-year forecast, which is where I want to spend about the next 30 minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
So Crystal, should we make the motion now for the budget and then you'll go on? Or are we going to do them both at?
I think we'll just do them at the end. And then this is the additional 3 years that you will be asked to make a motion to approve. And you can see where we only have 29.6 million in 22, gets pretty hefty in 23 and 24. And that's where you'll see the forecast come into play. And so this will be the other motion that I'm hoping you'll make and approve. So we have an approved 3-year capital plan. So unless there's any other questions specific to 22, I'd like to go ahead and move to the forecast. Okay.
Okay.
So in the forecast section, which starts on page 63, there are 2 sets of forecasts, one without new debt and one with new debt. The projected net incomes are almost the same, except when we start pulling in new debt, because then we're going to have additional interest expense that we'll have to pay on that debt. So the income statements start to get a little different and the balance sheets start to get different, whether we add debt or don't have any new debt.
Mm-hmm.
So the first set is no new debt. And honestly, I'm not going to spend much time on this because never in a million years am I going to recommend this to you. Clearly, if we have no new debt and we spend those dollars I just showed you on the capital plan, we go upside down in cash. Our days cash on hand is completely depleted. We would be highly dependent on some sort of line of credit just to make ends meet. Our unrestricted cash to long-term debt becomes negative. This is just not a feasible situation to execute our 10-year master plan with no new debt. It's just not going to happen. So I wanted you to see the red, I wanted you to see the negative, but we're going to move on to the next set of scenarios. Okay. Let's talk about this one. So these are our ratios with the anticipation of taking on $130 million of additional debt. Now, keep in mind that for fiscal year 2022 through 2031, we have on our schedules about $406 million of capital investments that we'll be making over 10 years. And of that 406, I'm expecting to pay 130 million of that with debt and the rest from cash reserves. Why $130 million of debt? Well, because that keeps us in the sweet zone of the ratios that we're looking for to either, with the bottom threshold of being a BBB minus rated agency, but we are striving to be A minus or better. And with these ratios, with $130 million of the new debt, we are basically doing that in just about every category, except for our days cash on hand. But even that still rises above the BBB minus zone. And so this provides us the ability to execute our projects, maintain our ratios, maintain decent cash reserves. But in order to do this, we must execute against the income statement. We gotta, because if we don't have the net incomes in these forecasts, this doesn't materialize at all. So what I wanted to do is just hop down to.
Crystal, could I just insert one phrase? And this is no new Measure C type debt either. This is just tax exempt debt. No new Measure C.
No general obligation bond. revenue bond or other structure. This is not being passed on to the taxpayers. All right, so in our 10-year forecast, you'll see here's the $471 million of gross revenue we talked about in 2022. And with volume growth and charge growth trailing off definitely in these later years, you'll see we have a steady increase in our projected revenues. But we're also seeing a steady increase in what we're going to write off in contractual allowances, which still puts us in the 250 million to 300 million net revenue zone. In our expense section, you'll see consistent growth in our salary, wages, and benefits. This is for anticipated normal staff increases, a little bit of additional FTEs as we consider whether or not physical therapy joins us in an employment model or if they consider it in a contracted model. So we've built some of those assumptions into these forecasts with modest increases for benefit costs, supply costs, purchase services that we've projected out for the remaining 10 years. You'll see that our EBITDA line remains fairly strong until we start seeing what I would say is limited growth and limited rate increases that I built in this forecast. So at some point, you know, we may capture our patient population, and at some point we may have saturated our rates that we can charge. And so I thought it was important to start to see the trail off of that in these later years, where we still have the ability to maximize that in these earlier years. These two highlighted sections is where the additional interest expense comes into play for the additional debt. I put 100 million of new debt starting in these early years and another 30 million in the 26-27 year. Basically, I said the debt's going to come on at the end of this year. We'll have the first impact in 24. 30 million will come on at the end of this year with the first impact in 2027. You'll see that it's going to be important for the organization to continue to have net income of 18, almost 15, 16, 17, 15, 15. I mean, we're in double-digit net income numbers, and in order for us to be able to execute against the master plan, these net income numbers have to be sustained. Harry asked me earlier how long I've been doing these 10-year forecasts with him, and I went back and started pulling binders, and I think when I presented the 2018 budget was the first time we had our 5-year forecast in there. Back then, in fiscal year 22, my forecast was that we would have net income of $15.1 million. You can see for 2022 today, that is $3 million higher. We're now at $18 million. So this line right here is the projections I gave you in the fiscal year 21 budget. In the 21 budget, 2022 was projected to have net income of 15.7. We're at 18. So we increased that by $2.3 million. You can see in 2023 has a $4 million increase. It flips a little bit in 2024 and in 2025, and then you can kind of start seeing we're kind of on track with what I was saying before. But these numbers here, this excess revenue expense or net income line, is what's feeding our cash flow and feeding our ratios to see if we can execute our 10-year master plan. Here's our projected cash flow. You can see the new debt being funded at the tail end of 2023 with the influx of the $100 million. And you can see the influx of the 30 million at the end of 2026. These dates were selected in order to keep these reserve numbers, days cash on hand, strong, and that we maintain them above the BBB- rating. And so the lowest we dip is right here in 2025, where we're down to $106 million. But we also have 64 million in building projects in 2023, 72 million in 2024, and 40 million in 2025. So these projects are about $180 million right here, of which 100 million will come from debt, and we're going to use some cash reserves. And so you'll see that 181 is dropping down to 106. So what this is trying to demonstrate to us is that we do have the ability to execute our master plan as presented, hoping there isn't significant inflation in those numbers in the building projects, because obviously if our building projects get more expensive, this changes. We have to execute our net income numbers, and we'll have to do our due diligence in getting reasonable debt for the district at key moments in time to not over or underinflate our ratios and to maintain our days cash on hand. So I wanted to share this with you because this is what Harry and I look at as we continue to march forward with the financial health of the organization, and why it's so critical that we continue to push hard to have a margin for the organization for its reinvestment, because we can't pull off these projects if we don't have that net income number. Any questions on this? Here are the ratios, by the way. You can see the BBB minus for cash is 132, and the lowest we get is right here, 143.
Crystal, Dale here. While I have tremendous faith and confidence in both you and Harry in planning these huge expenditures, the consequences of guessing wrong are really significant to the district. Are you seeking any outside counsel, review, advice on these huge expenditures?
So what I would say, Dale, is that the scrutiny is really coming on this building project line. You know, these are the projects we want to do. These are the projects that we want to do on a certain time schedule, but not everything has to be done in accordance with that schedule. So there are two, primary projects that we're looking at. One, which actually two of them are both revenue generating and have the potential to generate even more revenue, where I was conservative in my estimates. Mm-hmm. We are working with an outside firm to help us project some numbers around that to kind of shore up what we already believe we think we know, but it's just kind of a confirmation whether we're on the right track or not. And that's the largest project. That's that looking at the creation of the orthopedics, ambulatory surgery, consolidation, and kind of growing that outpatient surgical capability. And so we do have an outside firm confirming some numbers, helping us recognize, what should possibly stay being done at the hospital and what should move over to an ambulatory surgery center. You don't want to cannibalize yourself by just shifting cases from one location to another in a building that took a lot of funding to build in the first place. So yes, definitely getting help.
Thank you.
Crystal, on the plan, the projection for things like equipment and IT and construction that are all part of the capital, so many of them are mission critical. And at looking at them, you can see how the money has been divided over quarters, over what mission critical really is critical.
So really the critical factor is coming into play in 2022 and a little bit more or primarily 22, and then considered in 23, 24, and 25. Really those 3 years have more impact on the mission critical and high. Honestly, anything beyond really 2025 can be pushed unless regulation is going to come in and shut us down, it can be pushed. So that's where I was saying there's quite a bit of flexibility. It may not be what we want to do ideally, but we may have to do if those bottom lines don't materialize. So there is definitely flexibility in that outflow.
The other thing is there's many pieces of equipment here, and there's actual multiple building projects. So we have an opportunity to evaluate every single building project or even major piece of equipment before we do it, based on market force conditions, regulatory input, things like that. And so, you know, over the past 44 years, we've always had to adjust for that. So this is purely an estimate. But again, we want to make sure that our balance sheet remains strong. We want to understand our forecast out there as best as possible. And I think especially by 2025 and even before, I think there'll be some pretty strong hints as to regulatory change or other things, and even what do population trends look like. And I think even as I just think of maybe 1% growth rate or 2% or 3%, to me, those numbers over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, even that very nominal growth in the future is kind of, I'll just be candid, a little bit scary, you know, relative to, and that's much lower obviously than the last 6 years or so.
And the other thing, if I could just add real quick, I think it's important to know that we do this constantly. So if you look at 2021 right here, this building project number where we actually expect to spend 9.4 million was budgeted at 18.5. So we are constantly looking, assessing, does it need to be done? If it does need to be done, when should we do it? Do we have the cash availability? Do we have the staff? Do we have the permits? Is the town ready to move on this? I mean, all those things have to come into consideration. So we're already, you know, looking and shifting and making sure that we're making the right decisions. This just happens to be kind of the ideal world of what we would like to happen. Doesn't mean it's actually going to happen that way.
And then one of the projects refers to the, I think it refers to the 1966 part of the building. And since we're a patchwork of a hospital building, where is that located? Which part of the hospital is the 1966?
I hope I get this right. I believe it is the backside of the hospital near Levon, where like the old dietary areas, the loading dock, kind of that section of the hospital.
Okay.
The old med-surg ICU area, that old part of the hospital.
In the old OB area,
Okay.
it has to be redone from the ground up.
When do
Thank
we,
you.
when do we retire the current revenue bonds? What's the date for that Western edition?
Oh, those were 30-year bonds. So that would have been 2037 is the first.
30. I'm sorry,
2037.
2037. Okay.
Not in my lifetime.
No.
Gonna be in my lifetime.
Well, you know, our debt to assets, debt to equity, all of those critical ratios are really improving from where we were back in 2015. So even as we're carefully managing and juggling this bigger array of things, you know, our balance sheet is getting stronger, you know, every year overall, the way we're managing.
Okay.
This is Art. I agree with what you said, that we're not going to let ourselves get into trouble. I mean,
Right.
we look at this information so closely every year, and projecting out 10 years, I mean, that's a huge jump. So, you know, like Crystal said, you know, we had budgeted 18 million for a building and we only spent 9 this year. That's what continues to go on. So I'm really comfortable with this projection. And I'm also really comfortable that it's going to look way different than this 10 years from now.
Mhm. Are you going to be on the board to check it out?
You never know. Hopefully I'll still be alive.
So really, those were the highlights of the 10-year forecast. I just wanted to make sure the board had a feeling for, you know, the projected amount of capital that is in our plan, the amount of debt I think will be required to be able to execute that, using some cash reserves, maintaining our ratios. It's just a plan, and in order for us to stay on track, it's a good plan to work against. But obviously, as things come up or things change, we'll adjust accordingly. That's really all I have on the forecast section.
All right, any questions from our board, or any comments?
So we do need your consideration.
Okay,
for
if not,
approval
how
of the
about our
budget.
audience?
Alex,
Okay.
Dale here. I'd
There's
just
no
like to,
questions from our audience.
I'd just like to,
It may be worth mentioning just for the audience that if you did have a question, you can use the raise your hand function, which is in the bar at the bottom under reactions. And then the chair would call on you.
All right, thank you for reminding me about that and reminding our audience. So there is that icon at the bottom of the screen where you can raise your hand if you have any questions or comments.
I'm not seeing any.
So should we proceed then with, seeing none, then we'll do two different votes, correct? Crystal, you want two different approvals?
Correct. Yes.
One for the budget and then one for the plan. Okay. So could I have a motion to approve the Tahoe Forest Hospital fiscal year 2021 budget, inclusive of a 5% rate increase and excluding room rate and board rate effective August 1st, 2021,
And that's
as presented?
fiscal year 2022 budget.
fiscal year ending 20,
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I said that.
yes.
Okay, so
So moved.
I'll
Okay.
second. This is Art.
okay, so we have, okay, so it's been moved and seconded to approve the budget as presented. Could you do a roll call vote for us? Martina?
Director Shamblin,
Yes.
Director King,
Yes.
Director Brown,
Yes,
and Director Wong.
Yes. So the motion has been approved to, for the budget fiscal year 2022. Then we need a second motion to approve the Tahoe Forest Hospital District 3-year capital plan 2023 to 2025 as presented.
I
Can I
would
have a
move,
motion, please?
I would move approval, Alice. This is Mary.
It's been moved by Director Brown. Okay,
I'll
can I have a
second.
second?
This is Art.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve the capital plan for 2023 to 2025 by Mary Brown and Art King. And can I have a roll call vote?
Director Shamblin,
Aye.
Director King,
Aye.
Director Brown,
Yes, I,
Director Wong.
Aye. So both now have been approved. Thanks so much, Crystal, and your team for putting together such a comprehensive and understandable binder of our budget and the plans for the future. And if there is no further comments, David, can I adjourn until our next meeting?
You can close the special meeting
Okay.
and we will see you for the regular meeting at 4.
Okay, so as David said, so the meeting is closed and we'll see you at open session at 4 o'clock.
All right. Nice job on the